Hello, welcome to Dog Food with Katherine Able, the show about dogs that feeds your mind and spirit. This is part 2 of Some Old White Woman, Some Old Black Dude. When Gerald comes to, he's on his back in the middle of ring 6. He has never experienced so much physical pain. He's wary of moving. He assumes that if he moves, the pain will be worse, and worse than this is impossible and sickening to fathom. He dares to turn his head to check his surroundings. He sees the streaks and smears of blood on the concrete wall of the ring, and as he does, his body relives the pain and anguish of all the warriors and victims whose lives were destroyed this evening. He looks up and wishes he'd done anything but, because the dead, dangling bodies of the innocent, the old, the stolen, and the uncared for imprint on his mind, and he feels their last thoughts, their confusion, their terror, their pain, and their ability to love. He does not feel their release. No, that wouldn't be the end of the curse of the old white woman laid on him. She, a great lover and respecter of animals and humans alike, has only gifted him with the suffering, and suffer he does until he passes out, only to come to and suffer again, the terrible pattern repeating until he has experienced the tortured lives and deaths of every single canine that came onto his property some while ago. Tiny is in Gerald's house preparing her sisters their regular evening snack when she hears the gunshots. She stops what she's doing and goes to the door. Her sisters are chained in the backyard Gerald would not fence. They have the same crummy, dilapidated shelters. Gerald had looked at her in confusion when she asked him if he wanted her to pick up new ones for them at the Feed and Seed. When he looked like he was thinking of slapping her, she had turned, saying she'd get the old ones loaded, and she had. From the kitchen door, she watches the barn belch forth humans and dogs alike. She hears an AK-47 begin firing nonstop from the lower floor of the barn. She imagines Gerald and his cohorts are mass killing the dogs for fun. Then she notices the fear on the men's faces as they run to their cars, trucks, vans, and SUVs. The shooting pauses for just a moment before it begins again. Tiny is unafraid. She knows Gerald would never allow her to be killed. She finishes preparing her sister's snacks, goes outside to feed, pet, and talk to the only company she's allowed. She watches them lap up the nourishing, tasty fare. She listens to the heavy clanging of their chains against the metal bowls. She watches them drink the fresh water she has supplied. She watches them roll on the green grass in the dark, knowing the softness of it will soon disappear into dirt, and no one will care but her. She goes back inside to make Gerald's bed and to dust one more time. Gerald can't abide dust. Tiny awakens at 6 in the morning, as she does every day. She gets up, goes to the bathroom, then goes to the cupboard for treats. Gerald doesn't get up until noon each day. His lifestyle of crime and other business interests occupy the darkest hours. She's relieved she didn't have to work last night. She's also surprised. Gerald had told her she'd be responsible for cleaning the upstairs and for sex work whenever he wanted her to. She'd made no reply. She'd been told so many times that she had no other choice that now, years later, she was utterly convinced of its truth. Oddly, the big screen TV isn't on when she walks through the living room. Gerald must have spent the night in one of the sex cells in his new facility. She's glad she didn't, but it's highly unusual for him to do so. He always spends the night in his home, alone. Tiny is the only woman who has ever spent the night in his house, and not for sex. Gerald has never touched her in that way. The girls are waiting for her. They look so beautiful sitting and lying down on the lush carpet of green grass. What she wouldn't give to remove the heavy chains and bring them inside with her. She goes to Petal first. She checks her more often than the others. She's so worried this pregnancy will kill her. At 11 years old, she's too old to have babies from Ruger. He's 3 times her size. She caresses her growing belly, then sits on the ground so that Petal can lean against her and be held while she's being petted. Tiny loves this time of day. It's quiet, and there's a complete absence of violence. These few hours are the only time she can fully relax. Gerald never wakes up before noon, so she is allowed 6 hours of peace and quiet. It's particularly welcome this morning, when her body feels like her own because it wasn't brutalized by strangers the night before. She makes her languorous petting and hugging rounds with her sisters. As she holds each one, she apologizes to them that she can't do more. She checks all of their flea collars and can't help but smile as they look at her without scratching or twitching. She goes back inside to prepare her coffee breakfast, after which she'll go clean the facility, check on the other prostitutes, come back to the house to make Gerald's lunch, then stay out of his way as best she can. She fears the freedom she had last night will be paid for in spades this afternoon, and longer still. She walks across the empty lawn to the facility. The only car she sees is the money bus. She doesn't find this amiss. What she does find amiss is the total absence of personnel. Empty styrofoam cups, candy and sandwich wrappers, empty cigarette packs, and half-smoked cigars are strewn all over the torn-up parking lot. Gerald will have a fit when he sees that. This thought puts a spring in her step, and she hustles toward the building to get on with her work. If it looks anything like the parking lot, she'll have to work hard to get done in time to prepare Gerald's lunch. This is the way it must be done. All must be pristine by the time he wakes at noon. If she needs stitches, it better be taken care of. If there are drugs visible, they better be put away. If she has trouble walking 2 steps, she better figure it out. Because if Gerald's house and business is not in pristine order by noon each day, she will, and has, paid the awful price. When she opens the door to the lounge, she's shocked by what she sees. There's no way she can get this in order by noon, or even in 5 days. Broken tables and chairs dot the floor like crumpled skeletons. The mirror behind the bar is gone. There's broken glass from beer, liquor, and wine bottles all over the bar and carpet. She looks over at the door to the sex cells and sees it's wide open. She makes her way to it, careful not to step on any jagged edge or nail. She stands in the doorway and listens. Yet she hears nothing. No unsavory sounds, no sarcastic or fake banter, no running showers, no nothing. There's no one here. Just to make sure, she walks down the black-lit hall looking into each cell. The mattresses have been slashed apart, and as in the lounge, the furniture has been destroyed. Tiny walks back down the black-lit hall. She checks every room and closet on the first floor. There is no sign of life. As she heads toward the stairs to do something she thought she would never have to do, she sees the 4 large tip jars are full of money. Now, in a dreamlike state, she slowly descends, step by step, pausing, listening, hoping she'll hear someone or something so that she'll not have to enter and see the horror she knows is on the other side of that solid steel door that is closer and closer. The door, though extremely heavy, opens silently and smoothly on well-oiled, special-built hinges. A client of Gerald's built safe rooms for a living. He knew exactly how thick the door needed to be to block all sound from downstairs. It's a work of art and precision, because no matter at which point in the outward swing the individual leaves the door, it stays perfectly balanced, its crushing weight moving as gently and as though it is as light as a feather. Tiny peers around the edge. The first thing she sees are the bodies of the companion animals dangling from the noose chains. She jerks back in revulsion and vomits on the stairs. So much beautiful life gone. She's about to run back up the stairs when she remembers spotting Ruger sitting in one of the rings. He was, of course, staring at her. She knows he must be hungry, and she must check on him to make sure he's unharmed and to help him if he is. She breathes in deeply, stills herself, and silently the heavy door swings wide open. As she moves towards Ruger, she purposefully keeps her eyes averted from the carnage along the back wall. He stands and wags his tail when she approaches. There's blood on his mouth, chest, and on his right side. She squats down to run her hands over him to check for injury and almost falls over when she sees the dead dog, his throat gone, lying against the far wall of the ring. She shudders. Ruger had won the fight. She hugs him to her, sad that he'd been forced to fight for his life, for the senseless whims of bloodthirsty creatures pretending to be humans. But mostly, she hugs him to her because she's so glad he's alive and apparently unharmed. She and Ruger trot toward the exit. As they pass Ring 6, Tiny sees a human form balled up in a fetal position on the dirt floor. She stops. She holds Ruger back behind her. She looks at the body, tells Ruger to sit and stay, and opens the gate that is as high as her chest. As she moves forward, she can see the man is alive. His breathing is shallow, but he's breathing. As she gets closer, she's stunned to recognize Gerald. It's Gerald, but a Gerald she's never seen before. His face is misshapen, swollen. His jaw is askew. His face is covered in sweat and blood. She can see 2 trails running down his face that can be nothing but tears. He has been sobbing. Tiny, a human being well acquainted with physical pain and profound sorrow, recognizes the aftermath of sobbing when she sees it. It involves every muscle of the body. The work and struggle involved leaves its mark upon the face long after the unbridled convulsions have ended. She's too afraid to disturb him. She and Ruger leave as quietly as they can. The day passes and Gerald does not come home. Tiny is by turns terrified and unreasonably defiant. She thinks she has probably gone crazy. For when she and Ruger arrive back at Gerald's, the first thing she does after feeding him is to give him a soapy, filth-cleaning bath. Though he'd never had a bath in his life, he stood still, staring at her the whole time, and let her have her way with him. After all, it was Tiny, the first and greatest love of his life. His Tiny, a being filled with love. When she had finished bathing and drying him, she took him to his spot and chained him to his post, right next to his shoddy shelter. But she hesitated before leaving. Then she stopped altogether. What she did next was the most daring and terrifying act she had ever attempted, though she had endlessly dreamed and fantasized about doing it for years. She moves to Petal, unlatches the chain, leads her to the water, and bathes and massages the old girl until she's grinning like a sleepy fool. One after the other, she bathes her dirty, stinking sisters. She cleans their ears. She massages them dry and marvels at the beauty of their soft coats. No fleas, no ticks, and no chains. She watches as Ruger, Petal, Jasmine, Harriet, Poof, and Brownie smell one another like old long-lost friends. She watches as they lie down in the sun, just barely touching one another, but indeed touching one another. Tiny is too exhausted and too happy to feel fear. She thinks Gerald will probably beat her to death for these 6 acts of caring defiance. But looking at her sisters and at Ruger, she can sense how peaceful they feel, how lacking in anxiety and loneliness they are. And she doesn't care. She thinks it's worth it. When she gets up to go back inside, her family follows her, something they've been wanting to do since the day they were born. And she lets them. 3 more days pass. Gerald remains balled up in a fetal position in ring 6. No one has come to the house to work, to ask a favor, or to beg for money. It's just been Tiny and her family, and the happiest 3 days of her entire life. Her family is with her all day and all night. The second day, she had gone to the facility and hauled out the high-dollar dog houses Gerald had purchased for the heavy bedders and winters. They were insulated, large enough for a bed and to stand up inside, and also large enough to turn around in. They even had little front deck areas where the dogs could chill or just keep their feet dry. She had burned the rotted shelters and placed the insulated shelters under the 2-car carport and on the 12-foot deep front porch. When she had finished this work, she went to the shed, started the tractor, connected the trailer to it, then gathered the field fencing intended for mothers and puppies, and proceeded to fence an acre around the house. She had removed the posts and chains in the backyard, taken them to the bayou running along one side of the property, and dumped them there. After she had watched them irretrievably sink to the bottom, she turned and discovered her family had followed her, and that they looked worried. But when she yells loud enough to be heard over the purring diesel motor, "It's okay!" they relax and trot back toward the house. But Tiny, who has not spoken louder than a whisper since she can't remember when, yells, "It's okay!" again, again, and then again. And she laughs and fills the joy of those receding fat rear ends with those high wagging tails. Laughter! This is what it feels like. Gerald cannot move. He suspects a hip is out of joint, that multiple ribs are broken, and that his left arm is broken, that his jaw is shattered, and that he has a bruised spine. He will soon learn that 6 teeth are gone, 4 are barely hanging in there, that his right knee and left ankle are broken, his left hip is dislocated and broken in 4 places, that he has 2 hairline fractures in his pelvis bone, and that he has a cracked skull. But from the depths of this quagmire of pain, he feels a lightness in his spirit, which he thought he did not possess, and a joy in his heart, which he thought had been crushed to dust a long time ago. He cannot unfold his body yet, but he can feel, above the devastating pain, a buoyancy, a joy that he truly believed only existed in make-believe made-up worlds on television and in books he once read that he can barely recall. But it does exist. He can feel it so much that he thinks if he could reach out a hand, he'd be able to touch it. His hand would move in the direction of his house because he knows exactly from where this pure bounty emanates. It is tiny. He knows because across all the years of his beating her and using her and trying to destroy her from the outside in, that there always existed an almost extinguished flame of life, a tiny flame he could never reach and totally, cruelly douse. Try as he might, for some inexplicable reason, a spark of hope dwelled deep within her where no man could reach. He has no idea what she's been doing while he has lain on the dirt floor of Ring 6. He does know that her joy has been amplified 6 times over. He can feel the affection and tenderness Tiny and those dogs of his are sharing. For 2 days after he woke from the mini-coma from the physical torture he'd endured because he no longer believed in the power of wonder and the existence of good, he had felt Tiny's peace and joy and the contentment of those intelligent creatures he'd used but never deigned to name. He feels the struggle in Petal's aged body to nurture the 6 lives, growing in a belly that should have only been filled with food after she gave him the 10 perfect beings in her first litter. He had sobbed. He had sobbed so hard he'd fainted. When he remembers the cause, 3 days ago he truly believed that dogs did not and could not think, that they did not feel, that they were incapable of an act as mysterious as love. Now he knows differently. He would look over if he were physically capable of it and beg those dangling corpses for forgiveness if it would make any difference. For he had felt the trust, the confusion, the love, and the thoughts of every single one. He had felt the emptiness and stretch, the depression, a sorrow so profound it had snuffed out all other feeling. Why had he not seen this? Why do others not see this when it's so obvious? All of those men who came here, none of them believed dogs to be capable of feeling or thought, though they all witnessed time and again their cries of pain, their cowering in fear, their struggle to breathe and live as they were murdered by a craving for violence that they themselves found incomprehensible. Oh, the terror he had endured. Who was that crazy old white woman? And he chuckles. Somehow he chuckles, because it's at that moment that Tiny, on the other side of the property, is shouting, "It's okay," over and over again, and then she's laughing out loud. Gerald weeps in shame and regret and hopes with his new heart that Tiny will leave him to die. On the 5th day, Tiny can no longer bear it. She must go see Gerald. Her sisters and Ruger have become inside dogs. They eat with her, listen to her, go on long walks with her, and then they sleep with her. There's barely enough room for her in the bed, but there is, because she's tiny. When she starts walking toward the facility, her sisters follow her, but Ruger, for the first time, goes into his insulated house under the carport. She doesn't try to coerce him to come with her, because unlike Gerald, who has just recently begun to discern the depths of dogs, she has always possessed the ability. It exists within her to feel and to know the least fortunate. Her sisters follow her. Their presence and the hours of the past days have given her a newfound confidence. She doesn't know if it will last, but that at this moment in time, as she moves toward the man who has used, abused, and terrorized her for too many years, this newfound confidence is with her. She looks down at her sisters and sees that they, too, are not afraid. They enter the facility and walk toward Ring 6. Petal, Poof, and Brownie walk inside the ring and smell Gerald. Harriet and Jasmine see the bodies of their kindred spirits dangling from the noose-shaped chains and hesitate. They look at Gerald, at Tiny. They lick her hand to encourage her to leave, but Tiny moves toward him. Harriet and Jasmine leave to sit outside the open door. They can watch just as well from there. When Tiny moves around Gerald, she sees that Petal is licking his face and that he's alive, and that he's crying. He looks up at her and then quickly away. Tiny is so startled she almost trips and falls. She doesn't know what to say. Poof is smelling the air and passing gas, but even her superpower cannot cloak the burgeoning smell of decay. Tiny thanks her for trying as she squats next to Gerald, but far enough away so that his fists cannot reach her. She soon sees she need not have worried. His body, like his soul, is broken and deformed from she knows not what. On the way back from the hospital, she asks herself why she let him lie on the dirt floor for 5 days. She tells herself it's because she thought he would come home when he felt like it. He always told her he didn't need her help and to get out whenever she offered it. But he did need her help. She did everything for him but feed and go to the bathroom for him. He was almost totally reliant on her for managing his home and cooking all his meals. She left him lying on the dirt floor because she just did. She can't figure out why she did it. She just did. She thinks now is the time she should leave. This is her chance to get away from him forever. But then she looks in the rearview mirror and sees her sisters and Ruger looking back at her, and she stops at the grocery store to stock up. The doctor in the emergency room where she took Gerald said they'd be in contact. What the doctor and his staff will eventually discover is that they will not be in contact because it's impossible. The only thing legitimate about her identification was her photo. The number she gave is made up. The address is false, as was her age. They won't be getting in touch with anyone. But when they learned of Gerald's top-of-the-line insurance coverage, the questions soon faded to silence and to an almost choreographed turning away. As she hands the checkout girl some of the money taken from one of the tip jars, she briefly wonders what happened to him. It's obvious that his mind is broken along with his body. Who beat him like that? Where was everyone? It was so weird. It's also weird going to the grocery store, buying whatever she fancied, and then paying without anyone looming over her shoulder in a bored, menacing manner. After the grocery store, she goes to the feed and seed store and buys what she has been dreaming of buying since she laid eyes on the first pit bull Gerald imprisoned and used. She doesn't bother getting a buggy. She goes straight for the large flat carrier. When she leaves the store, it's loaded down with a variety of dog beds, brightly colored food and water bowls, chew toys, balls, treats, and more treats. Collars that reflect the personalities and complement the color of each member of her family. She buys brushes and combs, extra flea and tick collars, supplements for Petal and her puppies, wonderful-smelling, efficacious shampoos, canned puppy food, dry puppy food, puppy pads. She buys puppy anything she sees. She buys what she has always wanted to buy for her family, but has never been allowed or able to. Her heart soars as she loads the carefully and lovingly chosen goodies into the SUV. Petal, Harriet, Poof, Jasmine, Brownie, and Ruger push over and jostle one another to make room. Ruger barks at the movement and all action ceases. The girls look at him, startled, waiting for a sharp rebuke that never comes. And when Tiny breathes out the breath she was holding, Ruger barks again, and Tiny laughs out loud. Tails are wagging and rear ends are moving as she shuts the back doors. When she goes around to the driver's side, she puts her left hand on her mouth to feel her smile. Gerald is on the operating table, weeping uncontrollably. He's overcome by the overwhelming feelings of a type he has never experienced. The surgeons think it's from pain. If asked, Gerald could not have said or explained it, only that he never wanted it to end. When the anesthesiologist administers the sedative, he tells Gerald it's okay. Gerald hears the familiar proclamation and almost smiles a genuine smile. But it has been over 21 years since he has done so, and for the moment, as all fades to black, he tries to remember how to do it. 3 weeks later, Petal gives birth to 6 babies. 3 are white like Ruger, but are female. 1 could be Petal's clone, but is a male. One is a blue brindle female with white on the tips of her toes and chest. The last, the runt that was born without breath until Tiny filled his lungs with her own, is fragile and must be monitored closely because his siblings shove him out of the way at feeding time. Tiny has to place him next to Petal and remain to watch, to make sure he receives the necessary life-sustaining nourishment. He's solid black, and Tiny can't help but love him the most. They grow fast, except Emmett. He doesn't begin to thrive until he's 4 weeks old, at which time Tiny thinks she should have named him Tumble Jumble, because he tumbles and jumbles into everyone with never-ending abandon and joy. It's as though he's making up for lost time. Petal, understandably, is worn out with them and doesn't want to nurse. So at the 3-week mark, Tiny separates them from her. While everyone, except Petal and her babies, was at the vet being spayed and neutered, she had purchased a portable fencing apparatus specifically designed to sequester puppies, baby ducks, baby chickens, baby anything really. It's set up in the living room, and puppy pads cover the floor beneath it. Tiny is exhausted, but happy for the first time she can remember. She loves caring for everyone. She loves how relaxed and content her family is. She loves that Jasmine is wearing a yellow collar with pink flowers on it, that Harriet's is red with blue and white dancing bears, that Poof's is brown with purple and red balls on it, that Brownie's is gold and will glow in the dark, that Ruger's is black with American flags running around it. She loves that Petal's is black patent leather, and that from it hangs a red heart with her name engraved upon it, in big capital letters, just like everyone else's. Tiny is exhausted from the work, the cleaning, the constant cleaning, and the tending, but she's not exhausted from the affection and love. These abused and neglected companion animals love her so deeply, and it is with a humble wonder that Tiny returns the love, and probably for the first time in her life experiences what it means to be loved and to love deeply in return. She's not ashamed to admit how much she cares for these creatures, whom she has had the privilege of watching bloom and thrive under her care in their newfound freedom. She looks at Ruger now, lying on the floor while Emmett crawls all over him and chews on his ears and his mouth. She watches Ruger fall asleep while Emmett works him over, and she thinks that Ruger is not a fighter and was never meant to live such a demeaning life. He's gentle, patient, and a remarkable daddy to his offspring. What makes humans think they can do whatever they wish to creatures other than themselves? What gives them the right to use and destroy lives whose value, even to this day, is proving to be invaluable to humans? How can humans be such idiots? Any fool has got to know that chaining an animal or forcing them to live in a chain-link cell is wrong. Their misery is obvious to anyone who has a brain and eyes to see. Why do so many humans allow this disrespectful treatment? It is so wrong, and yet it's everywhere. Can't people just think while they see? Is that too much to ask of her fellow man? Yes, it must be. She thinks and shudders when she remembers how she has been treated. How insane for her to think speechless creatures would be given more consideration. Haven't the past years educated her to the awful reality? She ought to go get a gun and shoot them all and then herself. But she can't. Why can't she? Why can't she give up? The true miracle, which Tiny can't see after years of betrayal, misery, and abuse heaped upon her by her fellow man, is that she has not given up on them or herself. Tiny is one of the rarest creatures on earth. She is one who is incapable of hate or being the deliberate source of distress to another living being. The years may have been mostly malignant, but the unpleasantness has not and will never penetrate her heart and soul. If she could only shake the fear that keeps her from leaving, the fear that makes her stay. She looks down at her family and wonders where else she could be with them. She has no job, no money, can't read, and has no legitimate ID. She's trapped. In the first weeks, these crushing feelings of being trapped almost suffocated her. But as each day unfolded into the next and peace continued to reign, she disciplined herself to live in the moment. She could not worry about something that may never happen. She began to believe that she was a survivor and could survive. What could be worse than she had already lived? After a while, Tanya relaxed. She removed all of the money from the tip jars and put it in a kitchen drawer. It filled a 1-foot deep, 2-foot wide drawer to the brim. In order to make it all fit, she had to smooth out the bills and stack them neatly side by side. What she couldn't fit using this manner, she put in a shoebox. When the shoebox is empty, she fills it with money from the drawer. The shoebox has been filled 2 times. Dog food, treats, shampoo, toys, flea and tick medications for 12 dogs. It adds up quickly. By the end of 2 months, her discipline pays off. She no longer worries or frets about tomorrow. Instead, she embraces the long, heat-filled days and spends every waking moment with the dogs. Ruger goes everywhere with her, because he'll have a raucous throw-down fit if he doesn't. The first time she left him to go to the facility, he barked, then whined, then rolled on the ground, then convinced her his back right hip was dislocated. His hysterical cries were effective. The sight of him dragging his bottom across the floor in seeming agony scared her to death. The sight of him recovering immediately when she opened the door for him made her smile. Today, she and Ruger are exploring the land. They have walked and have encountered no other person. She hasn't even seen another house. 2,000 acres must be a large piece of land. Within the vast virgin forest, she discovers trails that men must have developed when they planted and nurtured the trees. They wind throughout the undulating terrain. She crosses running streams, wades through clear creeks. She sees fallen giants taken over by the flora and fauna of the land. She and Ruger sit in the shade of a huge fallen pine tree to watch ants, the squirrels, the birds, and an armadillo moving to and fro. Tiny breathes in deeply, not yet realizing her spirit is healing as quickly as her body. On the way home, she begins to trot. When Ruger passes in front of her, she speeds up and runs, then runs faster, racing Ruger all the way home. Winded and out of breath, she falls down onto the grass. Her sisters and the puppies run out to greet her and to make sure she's all right. Once they're confident she's okay, they flop down beside her, near her, and on her. Tiny is on her back looking up at a beautiful blue cloud-filled sky. The dogs are chewing on bones or balls or rope toys. The puppies are climbing over her legs and stomach, and she thinks how wonderful their little healthy warm bodies feel. She watches the clouds move gently across the sky. No 2 clouds alike, she thinks. She plays a game with herself she recalls from her adolescence. Find something. For her, all of the clouds are dogs or dog-related. She sees running dogs, jumping dogs, grinning dogs, sitting dogs, all different breeds. The breeze blows across her face. She reaches her hands up to the sky and into the light of the bright sun. She looks at her hands. There are calluses from work and scars from injuries. She sees the veins, the outlines of her bones. She looks at her hands, flexes them against the clouds, stretches them in front of the sun, and decides they're good hands. They're hands that have helped heal wounds, deliver healthy puppies, comforted the anxious and lonely, cooked delicious, nutritious meals for dog and human, mended clothes to prolong their use, cleaned many a room, polished many a window and bathroom floor. She looks at her hands and decides they've done a good bit of honorable work. She thinks, then believes, that her hands are an extension of her mind and heart, that her hands have completed good tasks and worked for good. Maybe the tasks were menial, but the jobs they completed were important to the puppy who lived, to the dog covered in fleas, and to the people who cleaned their plates. What Gerald forced her to do with her body, the way he permitted others to abuse her, that was not her doing. Those were not her ideas, and the vile acts perpetrated upon her had nothing at all to do with her or who she was. Ruger has been staring at her unceasingly from 3 feet away. Now he shakes off his offspring crawling on top of him, lifts his big muscular body, and goes to the tiny human he loves. He licks away the water soaking her cheeks. He licks her neck until only his slobber remains. He puts his big head on her chest to stop her trembling. Birds sing enticingly to seek out one another. Strong winds move through the tops of the tall pine trees. They bend without breaking. Tiny sighs deeply, places her small, honorable shaking hands on Ruger's massive head and rubs gently behind his ears. A sweet, pervasive calmness comes over her. Something has changed inside her, deep inside, in the place she has kept hidden and forgotten until now. Time passes. Tiny, Ruger, and whomever of her sisters can keep up, run up and down the trails in the 2,000 acres of untouched forests. There are acres upon acres of pine trees that soar into the sky, their trunks so big it would take all of her sisters touching nose to tail to encircle the largest ones. The birds sing to her and to one another. Tiny will pause from time to time to listen. This has become a time of slowing down, slowing her thoughts, trying to learn wise thinking. Though she is running more than she ever has in her life, the pace of her life is in slow motion, and she likes the gentle feel of it. She hopes this newfound peace in her life will help her discover the right direction to move forward. She has admitted that a vast change, a shift of tectonic proportions is occurring in her life. She has no idea what she wants. She only knows what she will no longer allow. This time of solitude is calming her spirit and giving her confidence. She will never forget the value of solitude. When Tiny was a little girl, she loved to run more than anything. Not wild, racing down the streets and sidewalks, just even-paced, nonstop running. When other children were playing in the neighborhood playgrounds or nearby abandoned homes, Tiny was running. She could run fast if pressed, and she was sometimes, because there were and are always predators waiting, hoping, and plotting to prey upon the weak and too trusting. But most of the time, Tiny just jogged. She could outrun them all if need be. She could skyrocket forward and maintain her speed until she ran into something, tripped, or nothing. She had never run out of breath, and no one had ever caught her because she was as coordinated as she was fleet of foot. She could dart and dash with startling speed out of the reaching grasps of those who meant to harm her. She didn't curse them or think about them. They were just a part of her life. Adults attempting to prey upon her had started in her own home when she was 5 years old. Horny, sick uncles, horny, stupid teenage boys, and the man who said he was her father but never acted like it. No one ever caught her. No one ever caught her until she trusted and ran toward the one who convinced her of his good intentions simply by never attempting to touch her or make her feel that he desired to do so. When she started running again, she forgot about smoking. The habit completely evaporated. She's running through the forest. Ruger runs beside her, in front and behind. He may pause from time to time to investigate something interesting, but he never lets her get farther than his sight or hearing. They run. Ruger never needed to acclimate his weird body to the long runs. Tiny's muscles eventually remembered the rhythms, but the years of chain smoking initially crippled her. She was easily winded and even vomited when she pushed herself too hard. Those days are gone. Tiny runs for hours each day. When it rains, she runs. She runs at dawn. She runs at midnight. She'd run 24 hours a day if she could, if she didn't think it an exhibition of unhinged behavior, of someone running from something. The running cleanses her. Her now healthy body becomes pure muscle. Her lungs become stronger too, because she practices using them wisely, breathing in and out deeply and with conviction and purpose. It takes so many hours, so many days, days that melt into weeks, then months, but soon she realizes her mind has become as fit as her body. By the end of 5 months, she has spread her sorrow, her anger, her self-loathing, and her anguished memories along the leaf-strewn trails where they were further trampled by many, many paws, until they were light enough to float into the limbs of the trees, where they were decimated by the grabbing branches and aggressive winds. But try as she might, she cannot totally rid herself of the fear she feels for Gerald. Again and again she asks herself, why doesn't she leave? He could be dead for all she knows. But she knows he isn't. Somehow she knows. Her main excuse is the dogs. There are 12 dogs under her care, 12 dogs who depend on her for food, care, and affection. The thought of selling Petal's puppies does not even occur to her. It never, ever would. At night in the living room, after hours of running, after activities spent playing with the puppies, after cooking, feeding, petting, bathing, and simply sharing being alive together, Tiny sits on the sofa with Emmett in her lap and Ruger at her feet. The others are on the floor or on their beds or on other furniture, and she thinks about her future. What's she supposed to do? Sooner or later the money will run out. She can't read. She has no legitimate identification, and she's not a criminal, a person who can go out and unconscionably steal, cheat, or lie. What does that person do with her life? What can the person who has no money and no skills do? All she knows is dogs. That's all she knows how to do. She thinks these thoughts without realizing that she does have skills. She can manage a household, plan menus and execute them, landscape an entire yard and keep it manicured to perfection. Tiny has so long heard what a loser she is that she secretly, almost wholeheartedly, believes it. What stops her from believing it is the unconditional love she's exposed to every day, all day long. There are 12 perfect souls who look at her with love and believe she can do anything. When she's with them, she thinks everything might just turn out all right. It's 6 months to the day when her family warns her of an approaching sound. She's behind the facility, putting dirt on top of the last grave. Her family is inside the fence, even Ruger, because none of them like to come here. She goes inside the facility and puts the shovel back in the storage area. The dogs can't see her, and neither can the people pulling up to the front of the house in the silver sedan. The dogs are barking to warn, protect, welcome, and play. The puppies are running around the older dogs as they bravely sound the alarm for this unprecedented occurrence. The puppies are nipping, fat, happy, and joy-filled. They're loved. They have never known a chain, never known human-inflicted brutality. Tiny raises a steady hand to her perspiring brow and wipes the moisture away. She knows exactly who it is. This day was inevitable, and now she must make a choice. She wipes her palms on the front of her jeans as she looks toward the house, the home she has made. The lawn was cut just yesterday. The windows sparkle because she keeps them crystal clear. She sees the dog houses and elevated dog beds scattered on the front porch and under the carport. She sees chew toys, brightly colored balls, old running shoes chewed away to almost nothing. In her mind, she sees her bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, thick, soft dog beds along the edges of the room. Soft piles of blanket dot the floor like friendly little hills. Bags of thoughtfully chosen treats are on the kitchen counter. She sees the only safe and comfortable place she has ever known, a place she has transformed into a haven of warmth, security, and freedom. Her family has known freedom. Tiny feels her heart begin to pound and the muscles in her legs begin to quiver. She memorizes the sight of Ruger barking, of Emmett tackling his siblings, of her sisters, Petal, Jasmine, Harriet, Brownie, and Poof, standing at the fence with their tails wagging and wagging. Her sisters she has set free and cannot bear to see imprisoned again. She watches Gerald exit the sedan with the assistance of the driver. He's using crutches and looks weak as he stands. She watches the sedan drive off. Gerald continues to stand with his back to her. She watches him looking at her family. She watches the dogs' reactions. The puppies are overjoyed, as they have only known kindness from humans. But Tiny is surprised to see her sisters are not afraid of him. She sees that Ruger has stopped barking, but he too does not appear to be afraid of Gerald. She doesn't understand what this means. Gerald turns his head and stares into the shadows of the facility. because he knows that's where Tiny is. He can feel her. He knows she's watching him. He wills her to come forward and meet the man he is becoming. Come out, Tiny. Come out. With one last glance at Ruger to make sure he's not looking for her, she silently fades into the shadows of the facility. When she comes to the open back door, she's already running as fast as she can, running away from the man who beat and enslaved her, running away from a life she can never return to, running away from the only love and loyalty she has ever known. Her mouth is wide with the scream Tiny will not allow to exit. She runs and runs and runs. This has been part 2 of Some Old White Woman, Some Old Black Dude. Thank you so much for listening to Dog Food with Katherine Able. Until next time.